Chapter 1. The Letter from Jaipur. The fog of an English February morning clung tightly to the soot-streaked windows of Scotland Yard. It was just past 9:30 when Inspector Harold Price set down his copy of the Times and opened the envelope that had been placed neatly on his desk. The paper was embossed with the red and gold seal of the British Residency in Jaipur, India. The contents were concise and unsettling. To Inspector Harold Price, Scotland Yard, it is with great urgency that I write to request your presence in Jaipur. Last evening, Sir Bertram Harrow, Chief Resident and Crown Representative to the princely state of Jaipur, was found dead in his private quarters. The cause of death has been declared as natural by local authorities. Heat stroke, they claim. However, under separate and confidential cover, Lady Eleanor Harrow has expressed serious doubts. She believes her husband was poisoned. Given the political sensitivity of the matter and Sir Bertram's importance to Crown operations in the region, your expertise is required. Travel arrangements have already been made. Passage departs from Southampton within the week. Respectfully, Major Lionel Ashcroft, Deputy Commissioner, British Residency, Jaipur, Rajputana. Inspector Price read it twice. It was rare for the Colonial Office to summon an investigator from the yard, and rarer still to do so with such discretion. Sir Bertram Harrow had been a name known even in the political corridors of London, a meticulous diplomat, well-liked and shrewd in matters of trade and treaty. That such a man would die suddenly, and that his widow would whisper of poison, stirred something in Price's investigative mind. He leaned back in his worn leather chair, the brass buckles of his waistcoat creaking slightly. India. He had never been. He imagined the scorching sun, the scent of spices thick in the air, the clang of temple bells, and the fluttering veils of women in jewel-toned saris, a far cry from London's damp cobblestones and gaslight. Price reached for his pen and scribbled a response. I accept the assignment. Will depart post-haste. Inspector Harold Price. 3 days later, the inspector stood on the deck of the RMS Argona, the cold wind of Southampton whipping across his coat. As the vessel pulled away from the grey English coast, he turned to look back. London receding into mist and distance. What lay ahead he could not know, but a familiar thrill stirred within him. Not for the exotic voyage, nor the grandeur of empire, but for the mystery. For somewhere beneath the saffron skies of India, a secret waited to be unearthed, and a killer, perhaps, to be unmasked. Chapter 2. The Maharaja's Court. Price arrived in Jaipur under the unrelenting blaze of an Indian sun that seemed intent on burning through his starched English resolve. The moment he stepped off the dusty carriage that had brought him from the railway station, he was enveloped by a kaleidoscope of colour, scent, and noise. The Residency bungalow was a whitewashed structure set apart from the bustle of the city, spacious, stately, and unmistakably British. At its entrance stood Major Lionel Ashcroft, a tall man with greying temples and the stiff bearing of a soldier who believed deeply in the Empire. "You're late," Ashcroft said brusquely, shaking Price's hand. "But better late than never. We've managed to hold off the formal inquiry. For now?" "I gather Lady Harrow is still here?" Price asked as they entered the shaded drawing-room. Ashcroft nodded. "Grieving but observant. She's convinced her husband didn't die naturally. And quite frankly, I've seen enough postings in the colonies to know when something smells off. The heat that day wasn't abnormal, and Harrow was a fit man, played polo, drank very little." "And yet the official cause was heat stroke," Price murmured. "The Maharaja's court doctor declared it so. No post-mortem was permitted." Price raised an eyebrow. "Not permitted? By whom?" "The palace. That's the complication," Ashcroft said, lighting a cheroot and exhaling toward the open shutter. "We walk a fine line here, Price. Jaipur is a princely state. The Maharaja rules with full autonomy, though we guide from behind the scenes. The last thing the Viceroy wants is a scandal, or worse, diplomatic unrest." They were interrupted by the arrival of Lady Eleanor Harrow, dressed in mourning black, a lace veil pinned to her sun-hatted crown. She was striking, not conventionally beautiful, but statuesque, with a steady gaze that met Price's own without wavering. "Inspector," she said, her voice calm, but laced with something deeper. "I appreciate your coming. My husband was not ill. He was careful, methodical. Something happened that night, something no one will speak of." "Then speak to me," Price said gently. "From the beginning?" Lady Harrow gestured toward the drawing-room sofa and sat with the rigid poise of someone long trained to keep decorum at all costs. "He returned from the palace late that evening. Said very little. He looked disturbed, though he tried to hide it. I asked him if all was well. He only said, 'There are those who would prefer silence over honour.'" She paused. "He went to his study. That was the last time I saw him alive." "Any enemies, disputes?" Price asked. She hesitated. There were tensions regarding a proposed treaty, something about British control over railway access through Jaipur and into Marwar. Bertram thought it exploitative. Others did not. Others such as? She looked toward Ashcroft, who remained quiet. Then she leaned forward. The Maharaja's advisers, one in particular, a man called Ajit Varman. He's a mystic of sorts, but influential. He has the Maharaja's ear in ways even the British do not. Price took a mental note. "And there's another thing," she continued, lowering her voice. "When I entered the study the next morning, I found something odd." She reached into her black reticule and retrieved a delicate object wrapped in silk. "A peacock feather," she whispered, handing it to Price. "Placed neatly on the desk. My husband hated such frivolities." Price examined the iridescent plume, its eye glittering green-blue in the light. A curious calling card, to say the least. "I believe it was left for me to find," Lady Harrow added. "A message, or a warning." Later that afternoon, Price was granted an audience at the Maharaja's court, a vast hall of gold pillars, marble floors, and hand-painted murals of mythological battles and tiger hunts. The Maharaja of Jaipur, a young man of perhaps 35, reclined on a velvet throne beneath a domed ceiling, painted with stars. He was handsome, alert, and draped in cream-coloured robes embroidered with golden thread. His eyes were sharp with intelligence and guarded amusement. "You are the English detective?" he asked with a thin smile. "I am," Price replied respectfully. "Then you come for answers to a question that may not wish to be answered." "I come in search of truth, Your Highness." The Maharaja waved a jewelled hand. "Truth is a delicate bird, Inspector. It flies where it pleases." From behind the throne, a figure emerged, tall, lean, and draped in ochre robes. His face was calm, almost serene, but his eyes burned with something ancient and unreadable. "This is Ajit Varman," the Maharaja said. "He advises me in all matters, political and spiritual." Ajit bowed slightly. "Inspector, you tread where karma unfolds. I suggest caution." Price's eyes did not waver. "Then I shall tread carefully, Mr. Varman, but tread I must." Chapter 3. The Peacock Feather Clue. Inspector Price rose early the next morning, the city of Jaipur already humming with life as the faint aroma of incense wafted in with the breeze. From the shaded veranda of the Residency bungalow, he sipped a strong cup of Assam tea and reviewed his notes from the previous day. A prominent British official dead without warning. A peacock feather left deliberately on his desk. A palace mystic who spoke in riddles. And a widow whose poise concealed an undercurrent of fear. By mid-morning, Price had arranged to inspect Sir Bertram Harrow's private study. It remained sealed since the night of his death, untouched per Lady Eleanor's insistence. Major Ashcroft accompanied him, along with a quiet, turbaned orderly named Samir, who held the keys. The room was still and airless. Ceiling fans turned lazily overhead. Thick curtains blocked the fierce sunlight, leaving the study in dim shadow. Books lined the oak-panelled shelves, and maps of the Raj and Middle East adorned the walls. On the broad teak desk sat a blotter, inkpot, a silver cigarette case, and nothing else, save the faint outline of where the peacock feather had once rested. Price examined everything with surgical precision. "No sign of struggle," he murmured, running a gloved finger along the polished edge of the desk. "No broken glass, no papers out of place." "He was found in that chair," Ashcroft pointed, head slumped forward. "The residency doctor said his skin was flushed, rapid pulse, fever. He'd been complaining of nausea." "Symptoms of heat stroke or of poisoning," Price replied. He moved to the drinks cabinet in the corner. A small crystal decanter, half filled with amber liquid, caught his eye. Beside it, 2 tumblers, one unused, one with a faint rim of dried spirit. He unstoppered the decanter and sniffed. Brandy, with a subtle but sharp tang beneath. He dipped a litmus paper from his pocket into the liquid. It turned a faint yellow. "Unusual," he said. "This has been tampered with." "Tasted strange to me too," Ashcroft muttered. "But I thought it was just the local water affecting the spirits." Price nodded, carefully stoppering the bottle. "I'll have this tested." Then something caught his eye, a fine dust on the lip of the decanter, yellowish-brown, almost imperceptible. He leaned closer. "Ashcroft, fetch me a magnifier." Within moments, Price confirmed his suspicion. Clinging to the rim of the bottle were granules of saffron-coloured powder, barely distinguishable from the amber brandy. He looked up. "There are poisons in this part of the world unknown to most British toxicologists, derived from roots, insects, even sacred plants." Ashcroft gave a low whistle. "You think someone dosed his drink?" Price's expression darkened. "I think someone knew precisely what they were doing." As they moved to leave, something glinted in the carpet near the edge of the desk. Price knelt and picked up a small carved button, ivory, inlaid with gold, depicting the image of a coiled cobra. "Belong to Sir Bertram?" he asked. Ashcroft shook his head. "Not that I know of. Looks foreign, even for here." Price turned the button over. It had a broken fastening on the back, as if torn from a garment in haste. A ceremonial robe, perhaps. He placed the button in his coat pocket. "I want a list of everyone who visited the residency in the 48 hours before Sir Bertram's death. British and Indian." Ashcroft raised a brow. "Even the palace guests?" "Especially the palace guests," Price said grimly. "And I want to meet the doctor who certified the death." That afternoon, Inspector Price walked through the crowded bazaar district, where painted elephants shared the roads with ox carts, and women in bright saris moved like living jewels among baskets of turmeric, cardamom, and chilies. He paused at a stall selling medicinal herbs. Behind it stood an elderly apothecary with spectacles perched on his nose, and fingers stained the colour of cloves. "Tell me," Price said, showing him the granules from the decanter, now carefully stored in a small glass vial. "Do you recognise this?" The man examined it with mild curiosity. "Yes, Sahib. That is Ratijal, the powder of the Suma root. Very rare. Used in ancient rites, sometimes mixed with brandy or wine during rituals of release." "Rituals of release?" Price echoed. The apothecary shrugged. "For easing the soul from the body. Peacefully. But too much, and the soul goes unwillingly." "Is it common?" The man laughed softly. "Not at all. Illegal. Forbidden except in certain temples." Price left shortly after, more disturbed than reassured. Someone with deep knowledge of native herbs had used this root with deadly intent. Someone with access, precision, and a purpose yet to be uncovered. As the sun began to set over the domes and spires of Jaipur, Price returned to the residency with his mind swirling in quiet urgency. And as night fell, a new thought gripped him. If one death had occurred so silently, might another soon follow? Chapter 4. A Whisper in the Garden. The residency gardens came alive at night with the glow of hanging lanterns and the faint scent of flower blossoms. Inspector Price walked alone through the winding paths, thinking. He paused by a low stone bench carved with Mughal motifs and lit a cigarette. The night air was thick, almost syrupy, and the hum of cicadas mixed with distant temple bells. "You must not trust her," said a voice behind him. Price turned sharply. Out of the shadows stepped a young man, in palace livery, no older than 20, with alert darting eyes. The inspector said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was the surest bait for the truth. The servant looked around nervously before pressing a folded slip of paper into Price's hand. "She cries too often," he whispered. "Too easily. The English lady. But I've heard her speaking to the priest, in secret. It is not grief." Before Price could ask more, the boy vanished into the hedgerow. Price unfolded the paper, a torn scrap from a ledger, hastily scrawled in pencil. "She lies. She loved Ajit once. She lies still." The handwriting was spidery and rushed, but the implication struck deep. Lady Eleanor, widow of the late Sir Bertram, had once been involved with Ajit Varman, the mystic who now stood beside the Maharaja's throne. Back inside the residency, Price summoned Ashcroft and showed him the note. Ashcroft's expression hardened. "Good God, if that's true, it changes everything." "It also gives us a motive," Price replied, "and possibly a co-conspirator." "But surely not Lady Harrow. She's the one who insisted on your coming." "People have been known to call the police to divert suspicion from themselves," Price said quietly. "Or to settle old scores." Later that evening, Price made an unannounced visit to the palace gardens, where the Maharaja was hosting a private dinner for select guests. Under the elaborate canopies, elite courtiers and diplomats sat cross-legged on silk cushions, surrounded by incense, marigolds, and gold-leafed platters of food. Price wandered the fringes, his presence noted but not challenged. From the shadows of the pomegranate trees, he spotted Lady Eleanor walking in the moonlight, alone, or so it appeared. Then from behind a column, Ajit Varman emerged and fell into step beside her. Their posture was close, too familiar. Their voices were low and tense. Price stepped closer, straining to hear. "I warned you," Ajit was saying in a voice like silk. "We had an understanding." "You promised he'd only be discredited," Lady Eleanor hissed. "Not murdered. You gave me your silence. Now you give me your regret." "I never wanted this," she whispered. Ajit stepped in front of her. "And yet you came to me. Again and again. When your husband grew distant, when you needed reassurance, you trusted me more than him. You always did." Lady Eleanor turned away, tears brimming. "I should never have let you back in." Before Price could move closer, a guard's voice rang out. "Halt! Who goes there?" The scene dissolved instantly. Ajit turned calmly, bowing slightly toward the guard. "Just speaking to the lady. Her grief is heavy." Price stepped forward, revealing himself. "Yes, it appears her grief is complicated." Ajit's smile was infuriatingly serene. "Ah, Inspector Price, so curious always." Lady Eleanor's composure returned swiftly. "I was simply seeking air. I didn't expect company." "I imagine not," Price said. "Forgive the intrusion, your ladyship, but we must speak in private, soon." She hesitated, then gave a nod. The next morning, just as the sky began to lighten with rose and gold, a scream rang through the residency. Price rushed to the inner courtyard, where servants clustered, murmuring prayers. There, face down in the ornamental pond, lay Dr. Mehta, the local palace physician who had signed Sir Bertram's death certificate. His head was bloodied, and a small ceremonial dagger protruded from beneath his shoulder blade. The water around him was pink with spreading colour. Ashcroft stood pale at the edge of the scene. "He was to meet you today, wasn't he?" Price nodded grimly. He knew something, or perhaps he was about to change his story. He knelt beside the body and pulled something from the dead man's clenched hand. A crumpled bit of silk, torn from a robe. Embroidered along the edge was a distinct design, a golden cobra, exactly like the button found in Sir Bertram's study. Ajit Varman's ceremonial robes bore such symbols. Price stood slowly. One thing was now certain. The murders were not random. They were orchestrated, and someone at the highest levels of the palace was playing a dangerous game. Chapter 5. The Tiger Hunt. The death of Dr. Mehta had shifted everything. With the physician now silenced, two things had become abundantly clear to Inspector Harold Price. First, that Sir Bertram's death had been anything but natural, and second, that someone powerful, possibly with palace protection, was determined to eliminate all those who knew the truth. And yet the following morning, a gold-embossed invitation arrived from the Maharaja himself. To the Honourable Inspector Harold Price, you are cordially invited to join His Highness's Royal Tiger Hunt tomorrow morning at the Amma Jungle Reserve. It is a sacred tradition and an expression of our hospitality. May the jungle grant you clarity. By the hand of Ajit Varman, Royal Advisor. Price studied the invitation warily. Seems an odd time to go sport hunting, he remarked to Ashcroft, with corpses mounting. Ashcroft gave a dry laugh. Out here, the hunt is often more political than recreational. It's where allegiances are made and broken. I'd wager this is more than ceremony, Price said. This is theatre, a very deliberate stage. By dawn, Price was aboard an ornately decorated elephant, its howdah lined with red silk cushions, as a caravan of nobles, courtiers, and foreign guests moved through the dense teak forests of Amer, north of Jaipur. The jungle was alive with sound, the screech of peacocks, the chattering of langurs, and the occasional haunting call of a spotted deer. Beaters moved ahead, banging drums to flush game, while the guests sipped chilled rosewater from silver flasks and made idle conversation. Price, however, was not at ease. To his right rode Lady Eleanor, demure in a beige safari coat and pith helmet, her eyes carefully avoiding his. To his left, atop a grand white elephant draped in gold, sat Ajit Varman, his eyes scanning the jungle with unreadable serenity. This land, Ajit said suddenly, turning to Price, has its own rhythm, its own laws. Your English logic may not always apply here. I find that murder tends to obey no laws, Price replied, whether in Sussex or the Raj. Ajit chuckled softly. Careful, Inspector. Tigers are not the only predators in these woods. An hour into the hunt, the signal was given. A tigress had been sighted. The caravan split as instructed, Price's elephant lurching to the left path. He readied the rifle that had been handed to him, though he had no intention of firing. He was more interested in observing his fellow hunters than hunting the tiger. But then, a gunshot, and not from ahead, from behind. The elephant jolted. Price turned just in time to see a bullet pierce the tree trunk, mere inches from his head. A second shot rang out, this one whistling past his shoulder. The mahout cried out in panic and yanked at the reins. The elephant reared slightly, causing Price to lose his balance and clutch the side rail. Then silence. No more shots, just the wind in the trees. Price scanned the undergrowth. Nothing. Whoever had fired was either a terrible shot or had wanted to frighten, not kill. By the time the party regrouped, the Maharaja had been informed, and Ajit was speaking in hushed tones to his guards. Price said nothing of the shots to the group at large. Instead, he approached Ashcroft privately during the luncheon that followed. That wasn't a stray bullet, Price said. Someone wanted me shaken or gone. Ashcroft looked grim. I'll have the guard interrogate the beaters and trackers. No, Price said sharply. That will only warn them off. I want whoever did this to believe they missed. Let them grow confident. They'll slip. That evening, back at the residency, Price laid out all the physical evidence on his desk. The peacock feather, found in Sir Bertram's study. The golden cobra button, possibly torn from Ajit Varman's robe. The vial of saffron powder, identified as ratijal. And now, the torn silk from Dr. Mehta's hand, embroidered with the same cobra symbol. He stared at the items, then opened a sealed envelope that had arrived by special courier, results from the British medical mission in Bombay, where the saffron sample had been analysed. Confirmed as extract of the suma root, highly concentrated. Symptoms consistent with the reported cause of death, Fatal in doses exceeding 1.5 grams. Method of delivery, oral ingestion. Likely mixed in alcohol or tea. Price exhaled. It was what he suspected, yet it felt like a heavy curtain falling on any lingering doubt. Sir Bertram had been murdered with a rare Eastern poison, masked as a local ailment. Dr. Mehta had known, and had tried to tell someone, but it had cost him his life. Price's eyes moved to the cobra emblem once more. There was only one man in Jaipur who wore such symbols openly, Ajit Varman. As Price prepared for bed, a knock sounded at his chamber door. It was Lady Eleanor, draped in a long black shawl, her face pale but resolute. "I must speak with you," she said, her voice trembling. "Now, before I lose my nerve." He ushered her inside. She stood wringing her hands, then finally looked him in the eyes. "Inspector Price, I lied to you." Chapter 6. Shadows of Empire. Lady Eleanor Harrow stood in the centre of Inspector Price's drawing room, her shawl clutched tightly around her shoulders, her expression hollow but determined. "I lied to you," she repeated, "about Ajit Varman, about my husband, about a great many things." Inspector Price remained seated, calm but alert. "I suspected as much, but I'm listening now." She lowered herself into the chair opposite him, folding her hands, like a woman preparing to confess in a church pew. "It began last spring. Bertram had grown increasingly tense. There were documents, secret ones, draft treaties, land leases, railway rights. He was being pressured by the Crown to force the Maharaja's compliance." Price leaned forward. "Compliance in what exactly?" "Allowing the British to construct a new railway line through Marwar province, cutting directly through several tribal lands," she said. Bertram refused, said it was unjust and politically dangerous. The tribes were loyal to the Maharaja, and this would only fan rebellion. "And the Crown didn't take kindly to that," she nodded. "There were veiled threats from London, but then something else happened. Bertram found evidence that someone had been passing confidential documents to Delhi before they were even finalised." "Espionage," Price murmured. "Someone here, in Jaipur." "Yes," she said, "and Bertram believed it was Ajit Varman." Price's brow furrowed. "The mystic? Why would he need to pass information to Delhi?" She hesitated. "Ajit is not just a spiritual figure. He's extremely well connected in the regional political web, and despite appearances, he has no love for the British. He believes in slow, calculated resistance, undermining from within." Bertram thought Ajit was positioning himself to become the Maharaja's chief statesman by sabotaging British control quietly. Price sat back. "But why lie to me before?" Eleanor's voice wavered. "Because I knew Ajit long ago, before Bertram was posted here." Price studied her carefully. "You were involved?" She nodded. "Briefly, foolishly. He was magnetic, enigmatic, and dangerous in ways I didn't understand at the time. I ended it when Bertram proposed. But when we returned to Jaipur last year, Ajit reappeared. Gentle at first, then demanding." "Did your husband know?" "Not at first, but Bertram wasn't a fool. He suspected, especially when confidential matters began slipping into the wrong hands." "And you think Ajit poisoned him?" "I don't know, but I'm certain Bertram was onto something. The night before he died, I heard him arguing, on the telephone, with someone. He kept repeating, 'You've gone too far. I won't be silenced.' I never found out who he was speaking to." Price stood and walked to the desk. "Do you still have your husband's files, his notes?" She looked down. "No, after his death, several of his boxes disappeared. I assumed Major Ashcroft had taken them for safekeeping, but he says he never saw them." Price's face darkened. "Then someone else removed them, someone with access, and a need to destroy evidence." At that moment, there was a sharp knock at the door. A residency guard entered, breathless. "Inspector, urgent message from the telegraph office. It's from London." Price took the folded telegram and scanned it. His eyes narrowed. "From Superintendent Vale, Scotland Yard. Subject, confidential file, Ajit Varman. Varman, formerly known as Dr. Edward Verrill, expelled from Oxford 1888 for conducting illegal human trials involving indigenous herbs. Fled Britain, known to operate under aliases. Possible links to political radicalism and foreign influence. Price dropped the telegram on the desk. So that was it. Ajit Varman, the calm, composed mystic, was not Indian-born at all, but a disgraced British scientist who had reinvented himself in the folds of empire. A man with intimate knowledge of both cultures, playing one against the other, and now inching closer to control of Jaipur's political future. And worse, a man with the knowledge and motive to kill. That night, Price returned to the palace for an official dinner hosted by the Maharaja in honour of the ongoing harmony between crown and court. But beneath the chandeliers and silk drapes there was a sort of tension. Ajit Varman was present, smiling faintly, resplendent in his gold-trimmed robes adorned with the symbol of the golden cobra. Price approached him during the third course, where liver pâté was being served beside bowls of pomegranate and rosewater. "Splendid evening," Price said cordially. Ajit turned unfazed. "Harmony's always splendid, Inspector, when it can be preserved." "Curious thing about cobras," Price said, gesturing to his robe. "They strike only when cornered, or commanded." Ajit inclined his head. "Nature, after all, is guided by divine will." Price smiled tightly. "And murder?" Ajit did not answer. Instead, he reached for his wine, took a sip, and walked away. Back at the residency, Price began laying his trap. He wrote 3 identical letters, each addressed to an anonymous witness, and had them delivered quietly by hand to 3 different individuals. One to Lady Eleanor Harrow, one to Major Ashcroft, and one to the palace staff quarters, where Price believed Ajit had eyes and ears. Each letter read, "A new witness has come forward. The truth of Sir Bertram's murder and of the missing files will be made known at tomorrow night's gathering in the Residency Garden. I advise you to attend. If someone truly feared exposure, they would act, and when they did, Price would be watching." Chapter 7. The Saffron Confession. The Residency Garden had never looked more beautiful. Lanterns hung from neem trees, casting flickering golden halos across the manicured lawn. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Silver trays of lime-scented water and sweet rose sherbet circulated discreetly among the invited guests. Inspector Harold Price stood at the edge of the gathering, his eyes scanning the crowd. Every key figure was present. Lady Eleanor, dressed in elegant ivory, looked composed, though her fingers fidgeted slightly with her fan. Major Ashcroft, stiffer than usual, nursed a whisky and stood near the hedges. The Maharaja, charming and inscrutable, chatted with a diplomat from Bombay. And finally, arriving fashionably late, Ajit Varman, resplendent in a fresh saffron robe, without the golden cobra emblem. A notable detail. The moment had come. Price stepped onto a small platform at the centre of the garden. A hush fell. Even the string music stopped. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm but firm, "thank you for joining me. I've gathered you all here tonight, not for entertainment, but for revelation." There was a murmur. The Maharaja raised an eyebrow. Ajit Varman watched, his face perfectly still. "As many of you know, Sir Bertram Harrow's death was declared the result of heat stroke. But it was not. He was poisoned, deliberately, by someone who understood both ancient herbal practices and modern chemistry. Someone who knew precisely how to mask murder with tradition." Gasps rippled through the guests. "I had the residue in his decanter tested," Price continued. "It contained a rare extract of the suma root, a substance used only in certain Ayurvedic rituals, nearly undetectable in modern toxicology. Lethal in high doses, and someone went to great lengths to conceal it." He paused. There were clues: a peacock feather, a cobra-etched button, a torn fragment of embroidered silk. But most peculiar of all was identity. Price turned to face Ajit directly. Ajit Varman is not who he claims to be. His real name is Dr. Edward Verrill, formerly of Oxford University, expelled for illegal human experimentation, vanished into India under a new name and a borrowed identity. The crowd recoiled. The Maharaja looked stunned. Price pressed on. As Ajit Varman, he became the spiritual advisor to the court, whispering into ears, shaping political tides, positioning himself to control the future of Jaipur. And when Sir Bertram Harrow stood in his way, when he threatened to expose Verrill's background and secret sabotage, he was silenced. Ajit Varman remained eerily composed. "You offer words, Inspector," he said. "Where is your proof?" Price stepped down from the platform. "My proof," he said, "is that you couldn't help but leave a signature. The golden cobra, your personal emblem, was found as a broken button in Sir Bertram's study, and again as a torn silk fragment in the clenched hand of Dr. Mehta. He died trying to tell us who killed Harrow, but he left behind your calling card." Ajit narrowed his eyes. "That proves nothing." "No?" Price raised a hand. A guard stepped forward, holding a velvet tray with a robe, Ajit's previous ceremonial garment, neatly folded. "This robe was discovered this morning, hidden beneath the floorboards of your old meditation quarters, torn, stained with saffron powder, and missing a golden cobra button." There was no more room for ambiguity. Suddenly Ajit lunged, not at Price, but toward Lady Eleanor. The crowd gasped. 2 guards restrained him swiftly, wrenching his arms behind his back. "You lied to me," he snarled at her, his voice cracking. "You said there would be no blood. You wanted him gone. You said it." Lady Eleanor stepped back, face pale, lips trembling. "No," she whispered. "I wanted the truth. I wanted Bertram to see what you really were, but I never asked you to kill him." Price stepped in. "So it's true then, you were in contact before Sir Bertram's death." "She came to me," Ajit spat, "confided in me, used me, and when I tried to protect her, she turned on me." "You protected no one," Price said coldly. "You killed a man, and then a doctor who tried to speak the truth. You manipulated your way into a court that trusted you, and betrayed 2 nations in the process." Ajit Varman, Dr. Verrill, went quiet. The fire drained from his eyes. The guards led him away. The following morning, Jaipur's golden dawn broke across the pink sandstone palaces and temples. The air felt lighter, the weight of deception having lifted, at least for now. Price sat with the Maharaja in the palace gardens. The young ruler poured them both tea. "You've helped preserve something fragile, Inspector," the Maharaja said. "Balance," Price gave a faint nod. "Justice, Your Highness, or something close to it." "What will happen to the lady?" "She aided the investigation. I suspect the Crown will let discretion prevail." "And you?" "I have a long voyage back to London, and an unfinished report to file." The Maharaja smiled. "Then let us raise a cup to uncomfortable truths." They clinked their porcelain cups lightly. The scent of jasmine filled the air. As the train departed Jaipur later that day, Inspector Harold Price gazed out over the saffron-tinted fields, stretching into the horizon. Behind him lay ancient palaces, deadly poisons, and whispered secrets of empire. Ahead, as always, lay the next mystery.